that, buddy? That's not good.
Alright, thanks for coming back to Anthracite Horror Stories. Hopefully you like underground coal cars that have been long forgotten in abandoned mines, because that's what this video will be focusing on. Also, right now, if you're seeing this, smash the like button and subscribe. It helps me greatly. Many thanks for your continued support.
Bloody hell, would you look at that small car? Pity for the unfortunate bloke who had to push this thing around.
Just kidding, this was a coal scraper. Think of it as a shovel that scraped the low vein coal out almost like a bulldozer. This was necessary because the coal vein here is 2 feet high, give or take a few inches. Otherwise, getting the coal out in a flat pitch would have been much more labor-intensive and brutal. So they built a small rail bed going from the haulage gangway to the working face of coal. Notice the front end of this car and how it resembles a bulldozer front end. It was the same logic. This ingenious mining engineering saved many miners' backs and undoubtedly increased morale. This was a rare sight to see because these coal scrapers are usually not cars on tracks. In fact, this is a traditional-looking coal scraper. To see these intact underground in any presentation is rare. This is the only surviving textbook coal scraper I ever saw underground. Here's a second coal car scraper showing the back portion of the car. It looks like they had wooden planks that have rotted off of the upper portion of the car. This was just to keep more coal in the car during the scraping process. This site is telling, believe it or not. Here we see 2 loaded coal cars deep in this anthracite coal mine. Aside from their beautiful aesthetic, they're insightful. You see, the anthracite mines battled closures for years before their ultimate demise, for the industry was in decline beginning in the 1920s. So mines would often have downsized workforces and their days worked were drastically scaled back from, say, the post-World War II years through the 1960s. The 1960s were the decade that most of the mines ended operations. A lot of mines scaled back production prior to World War II due to the Great Depression. However, there was a resurgence in demand because of America's involvement in the Second World War. However, by the late 1950s, many of these mines were in terrible shape production-wise. The miners didn't know if they had work from day to day, unfortunately. Miners had to check the newspaper the prior evening in order to see if they had work the next day, as evident from my newspaper clipping. Which leads us back to these 2 loaded cars. Why are there loaded cars that never made it outside? Remember, the men were paid for coal produced. However, the coal itself had to make it to the breaker for processing in order for the men to be paid. If I had to guess, I'd say that the men who loaded these cars honestly believed they'd be back the next day. Clearly from these photos, however, the mines simply closed for good, thus leaving these coal cars in a limbo-like state. Unfortunately, the humidity in these mines will eventually devour the cars. The one car off to the right has obviously suffered a sidewall collapse. I bet the men that loaded the thousands of pounds of anthracite into these cars, and who most likely didn't receive compensation for their labor, were in fact pissed that this 2-car trip didn't make it outside. For us explorers, however, it was neat to see. Here's the backside of the intact car. This coal company placed the wheels on the outside of their cars. The construction engineering of cars varied from coal company to coal company. The gauge of the mine rail tracks, that is, how wide the rails are, also varied from company to company. This company had a wide gauge of track. The wheels being placed on the outside of their cars were to accommodate the wider gauge. This is somewhat eerie of an image, but rather interesting. Here the cars are, staring into the dark abyss forever. Nearby, going up the slope, there's another forgotten car. However, this one is empty. Water from the roof is dripping at a steady pace directly into the car itself. This will speed up the decaying process for this particular car, unfortunately. You can see the minerals from the mine water exiting the car in this cool photograph. The coal car might one day become one giant stalagmite. You can see how that is beginning from the bottom to the top of the car. Here is the other side of the same car. These are exquisite photos, if I may say so. Notice the angle of the car. This is the gradient of the slope. Here's a vintage-looking filter I added for this photo. Bloody fantastic looking. This photograph is surely one of my all-time favorites.
Interestingly, the car doesn't budge any, if I recall correctly. It's either derailed slightly or fused into place from the rust.
Regardless, this is a photogenic car for sure. This car probably transported a mind-boggling amount of coal during its service life. A shame it will not be preserved. Then again, it is somewhat being preserved down here because if it had made it outside right before the mine closed, it would have been scrapped most likely. Here's the position of the car on the slope in relation to the loaded cars. The loaded cars are resting on a siding off of the slope. Here's another nearby car. This one has suffered a severe structural collapse. Given enough time, all of the cars will eventually just vanish. The mines are similar to shipwrecks in this regard. This is another visually appealing photo. Not bad for a point-and-shoot camera on a tripod. It's not easy to take photos underground. However, if you take enough pictures and are relatively patient, many come out well. Look at the colors on the back portion of this car. There's even beauty in decay sometimes. Now we're off to a different mine for these next series of photographs. Here, an old wooden car is still on its rails going down a tunnel. Notice the milky-like appearance of the water. I would imagine this is from minerals. Regardless, the water and scenery seem extraterrestrial in appearance. One can sense that this car is just patiently awaiting for the next mining shift to show up. That crew will never come, however. This car is unfortunately mushy to the touch. The water and humidity is doing a number on it. If this car could speak, I'm sure it would have stories to tell. These cars often traveled many miles underground throughout these old mines, day in and day out, in order to be loaded. Once loaded, the cars would be brought outside with other cars that were now attached to one another. These cars were then called a trip of cars. These trips of cars were then sent to the coal breaker in order for the coal to be processed. These cars were hauled to the breaker by electric mine locomotives or narrow-gauge steam lokies. Sometimes the route from the mine entrance to the breaker could be several miles in distance, often going through woods and/or neighborhoods. Here the Anthracite Coal King is taking a much-needed break and posing for the camera. You can see the chains on the car here. These cars were once pulled by mules, which is rather remarkable to think about. Beginning in the 1920s roughly, electric mine locomotives would replace the mules. So one can deduce that this car, during its lifetime underground, would have witnessed the primitive animal haulage era evolve into the more modern machinery era, complements of electricity and engineering. These photos really capture the atmosphere of this mine. Here, my flame safety lamp is keeping a watchful eye for any dreaded black damp. Oxygen deprivation, also known as black damp, was a notorious issue for this mine, I noticed, while looking at old accident and fatality reports. Sadly, numerous men succumbed to the dreaded damp over many years down here. This photo replicates the old black and white photos that were taken of this mine back in its heyday. This is a homage to that era. An anthracite coal pillar is to the left side of the car, while on the right side of the car, the coal was mine and a gob wall erected in the coal's place. The Anthracite Coal King can really work that point and shoot camera, brother. Oh yeah, it's as though this coal car is modeling for the camera. There's some white mineralization occurring where water is cascading down from the mine, working and onto the railbed here. Traveling down the main slope of this mine, you'll come across multiple track sidings that go off of the slope. These are horizontal tunnels that were used to gather the coal from the workings. Here we are traveling down one of these tunnels, and we see yet another series of cars. This lead car has derailed, which is interesting. This is like walking back in time. I'm literally retracing the footsteps of my own ancestors. This section of the mine is dry, which preserves these cars exceptionally well. Maybe the car was traveling from the opposite direction and struck this rock in the middle of the tracks, thus causing its derailment? Who knows? But let us further investigate this relic from Pennsylvania's golden era of anthracite coal mining. This is such a rare sight to behold. I feel grateful for this opportunity to see this. This setup is actually a two-car trip. Here we are looking at the other side of the cars. Aside from a dry mold all over and throughout the cars, the preservation is breathtaking.
I feel like it's the 1950s again where I'm standing.
Look at that photo. Doesn't get much cooler than that in this hobby. Notice the anthracite coal pillar in the background holding up the roof of the mine. To have the roof still standing in these mines is usually a gift. Tracks being present are also a rare treat, but so many coal cars in one mine, nearly unheard of. Regular viewers of my videos know that I do not share locations of mines for various reasons, the most important reason being the preservation of the mine itself. However, this was a former Hudson Coal Company mine of the Delaware and Hudson Railroad fame. They operated many mines, not simply one or a few, rather many. I'll omit what specific mine this is again for the preservation of the mine itself. However, this is nearly an identical car in this historical era photograph. This one is just slightly more tailored for lower vein coal. Notice the coal scraper, perhaps it's the same one from my photo. Here's a side-by-side comparison from my Hudson Coal Company promotional booklet. The bumpers and framing are identical and even the number of chains are the same. The Hudson Coal Company used a very narrow gauge of track, and the wheels were on the inside portion of the car. This gave their cars a sleek look, in my opinion. This black and white photograph I took is a cool recreation of that bygone era. A nice comparison is shown here again. Believe it or not, however, 100 years have passed in between when these photographs were taken. It might actually be closer to 110 years to be precise. This black and white photo that I took looks authentically old. Just a beautiful scene for any mine lover. The color of the wood here looks like a painting. Looks almost like an old 50s era shot here. Even though the cars look intact, this dry mold will eventually consume the wood of the car. The bottom of the car is sadly disintegrating already. Here again is another historical scene from my Hudson Coal booklet. Make note of how this car looks, because I want to do another comparison for you. Whoa, in my black and white photo, you can see how this car is nearly identical. However, just like the other historical era photograph, that car seems to be slightly lower in height than this one, in order to accommodate the lower height of the tunnels. Also, notice how a wooden sprag has been jammed in the wheel spokes. That's how these cars were braked, as there were no brakes imagined in their design. Spragging could be a dangerous endeavor for those tasked with doing it. This miner is topping the coal car. They were required to do this by the coal company. They had to precariously stack additional coal above the top of the car, or else they would be docked, pay, or given unpaid time off from work. Here's essentially a side-by-side comparison of the cars. There's just a small height difference between the two. You can really see the dry mold on the cars in this photo. Anything made of wood underground in these anthracite coal mines usually has mold all over it. Another remarkable photograph, again notice the coal pillar behind the car. Anthracite is a really photogenic type of coal to photograph. It literally shines. Nearby the previous two coal cars, there's a third car sitting alone and way off of the tracks. This one is being consumed by the mold at a faster rate than the others. I'm not even certain if there are still wheels on this one. Sometimes cars were cast off to the side, like this one, in order to be used as a parts car. Look at the mold covering the car. It almost looks like the rusticles on the Titanic shipwreck. Here we are in yet another anthracite mine.
This car is ancient. It's very old, in fact.
If I had to guess the age, I'd say that it was from the 1880s, possibly even older. What a great photo. Notice the geology of the roof here. The car against that mining backdrop really stands out. Now in this photo, it's the same mine car as the previous one. However, the photos were taken years apart, 5 years to be exact. Same story with this shot. You'll see how the car is in a more intact state as opposed to the next photo. I was shocked to see how much the car had changed in just a few years' time. This picture was taken 5 years later. Notice how the side of the car is simply vanishing from deterioration. This is just the sad reality that nothing lasts forever, especially in a humid, old, abandoned coal mine. The car is deteriorating like a shipwreck. Both the underground mines and oceans are extreme environments. Alien-like life forms thrive in both of these environments. What in the bloody hell happened to this low-vein car? One thing is certain, the prop, that is the timber, in the foreground took some weight. Damn, that's scary. They often snap about halfway down, and this one is no exception. Getting back to the car, this car has no wheels on it. There's another one of these low-vein cars nearby, and that one too doesn't have any wheels. That tells me that the miners stripped these two cars for their parts. These cars look just like low-vein bituminous ones that I've seen. Here's the low vein of anthracite behind the car. Here's the second car. This was in fact a low portion of the mine. With the wheels attached, the car obviously would have been higher and much closer to the roof. My flame lamp attached to the side of the car is not that high. It's only about 10 inches high, which gives you an idea of the height of the car and the distance from the floor of the mine to the roof. Low veins of coal are always wild to explore. Seeing this car was a nice change of pace.
Speaking of wild, something wild happened here to this car.
Either it was flipped over in an accident from flying down the nearby slope, or it was simply flipped upside down in order to part it out by the miners. Tools on it suggest that it was flipped over by the miners, but who knows the whole story in regards to the car, because there is some considerable damage to it. Just beyond the car, there's a massive roof collapse that has completely blocked off the nearby tunnel. That only furthers the mystery of the flipped-over coal car. Here I am, standing near that collapse. Look at how intact the rail is and the wood on the car. The color of the wood on this car is just magnificent, almost like a cherry wood. Such a bizarre scene, but what a cool series of photos. Everyone that goes underground with me is probably like, come on with those damn photos, hurry up, in their mind. Ha 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 ha. I'm here though to document the mine properly, like an underground detective. I'm a man on a mission, a historical documenting mission. Here's a close-up of the damage to this car. Is this just from decades being underground, or from an impact? One thing is certain. These cars, either empty or loaded, were dangerous things to be on the lookout for while working in the mine. Sadly, many good men were cut down and their lives were taken from being run over by cars. Here's a few photos of more cars. I'll save these for another car-themed video that I'll do in the near future. I have so many more coal cars I'd like to share with all of my loyal viewers. I put in a lot of time taking these photographs, editing them, and then making these videos. I do this in the hopes that our local anthracite history will not be forgotten. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please share this video too with someone who would enjoy it. Please have a good day. And remember, I am the King of Coal. See you later.